In my presentation, I would like to focus on a very similar format to what Stephen has discussed previously. And it's a documentary on Ruth Kluger that follows her life. And in this case, it is an artistic documentary, so it's not per se an agut document as could be sort of defined in the strict sense, but Decker would claim that being part of the autobiographical discourse, it could still account as eco-document, so I obviously will stick to that definition for now. And in this documentary, obviously, she makes the intertextual references to her original publication, which was Weiterleben, published in 1992, German version, and then the English translation that she did herself in 2001, which she then called Still Alive. So already from this one can perceive that it's with translation, the meaning of words changes a lot, because Weiterleben in itself is to continue living, and still alive has a very different meaning. And I will not dwell into it, but what is very interesting in the case of her republication in the English version, she's very self-conscious of the publishing market, the target audiences, first in the German-speaking context in 1992, and then in 2001 for the English speaking and reading market in the US, where she basically changes what autobiographical information to include or what to exclude, which memoirs to sort of keep within, and also which focus to put in, because she had a second autobiography in the German version, which is called Unterwegs verloren, which was published in 2008, and then accounts for her experiences after her migration in 1947 to the States. What I mentioned before, what we heard from Stephen, that many times testimonials are by common people, as you called them, and in Ruth Kluger's case, obviously she's a public persona, and she herself is a professor of German studies, so in sort of not only writing herself, but presenting herself on film, she's very self-conscious of the processes of self-reveal, or also of activation of particular memories. And my research interest obviously was raised when I had the pleasure to meet her personally. So that was sort of the, let's say, impressive persona, and also maybe the differing persona of being professor on one hand in the public sphere, and then being very different and humorous person also when speaking in direct conversation. And some dates on her. So she was born 1931 in Vienna, and she survived Theresienstadt and Auschwitz-Birkenau, and then she was forced to work in the camp Christianstadt, which was like a sub-camp in Lower Schlesien of Großrosen. As I mentioned before, she emigrated in 1947, and what is very interesting is that she started what she herself calls a new life. And in her autobiographical accounts, she really makes this division of old life and new life. So she really sort of focuses on what was before and what was after. And I refer to this later on, because the documentary is called Das Weiterleben der Ruth Kluger, which in itself is also very metaphorical and taken obviously from her original autobiographical title. But in the English translation, it is called The Landscapes of Memory, so very different again. And the documentary obviously shows her already at a certain age, because it was produced between 2008 and then published in 2011. And the subjectivity and what I mentioned, the time passed, does influence the selection of what she also was willing to include and exclude, and is clearly audience-oriented, taking into consideration who the target reader could be, or listener and viewer. We heard yesterday from Gil that it also depends on the perspectives and redirection. So she clearly has a feminist approach as well, which led to certain discussions concerning how she viewed perpetrators, and sort of insisted on kind of stereotypes of female perpetrators and male perpetrators as being differing because of female emotions, male emotions. So in that case, she was one of the first feminists, obviously, but to a certain extent, maybe, yeah, fighting sort of for the good cause, but sometimes with the wrong reasons, one could say. And in what I want to focus on, the documentary, it's important to see that the start of the documentary and then the closing, and I will show a clip from the opening, takes place when she is rewarded the Frauenpreis der Stadt Wien, so kind of a feminist prize award of the city of Vienna in 2008. And Vienna plays a very important part in her life, in her memoirs, in all of her memoirs, and particularly in the documentary. With age, her views on her life have certainly changed and then also been extended and reconsidered and referred. So she sort of rewrote her own autobiography. And in the documentary, it is also the landscapes, or let's say the spaces that she returns to, that sort of make shifts in her perception or activate certain memories that she would not have if she had just stayed in Ireland and California. So what is also very important is that the stops that she does take in the documentary is Austria, so namely Vienna, then California, where she is based, Göttingen, where she was a visiting professor and where she had her accident, which sort of was the initiating impulse to even write down her first autobiography. And then moving on to Bergen-Belsen and Israel, opening about her life that mostly takes place in the United States. What is very interesting is that in the documentary, it's not only her as a person, and like in the many testimonies, it is usually not the director that is making questions, but is rather following her life and her steps, with her being conscious of the camera, obviously, because she plays into the camera, and you can tell from time to time that she sort of flirts with the camera and makes sort of expressions and also comments that she would not make naturally if there was no camera. But the director does not have like an active approach, but rather is sort of just following the steps of Kluger. When it comes to autobiographical memories, and what would be important here is to also see that those memoirs are never complete or accurate representations of like contents, dates, and characteristic of specific life experiences, because in many times, obviously, it's a conscious recollection of personal life events, and is best conceptualized as a reconstructive process in which traces of an original experience are integrated with and transformed by cognitive, personological, and social processes that operate at the time of retrieval. So it's very interesting to see that in her memoirs, and firsthand, on reading the first German version, then the translated English version she did herself, and then basically reliving and retelling her life on film, in 2008. So we see sort of gaps of 7-8 years on herself, recounting events from her life, but as is being seen, with different activation time and with different sort of let's say access to her own memory register. And what is interesting, obviously, in concerns of her age, is that age does differ in the basic nature of reminiscence. So older adults usually tend to sort of develop, and that's like what I learned in memory and cognition and psychology, that the nearer somebody gets to their end of life, the more urgent they are to sort of tell of their lives and to give testimony and sort of teach and leave something behind. In the documentary then, what is very interesting, and I don't remember right now if I mentioned it, it is not only Ruth Kluger that is followed basically by the camera, but it's also her two sons and the interactions that they have, which are mostly excluded from her written memoir, and also the ones with the grandchildren who were not born when she wrote her autobiographies. So in that case, it also opens a very interesting, let's say, window into the public persona and the willingness to share her autobiographical accounts with a public, an unknown public to her, and then her reserved way of thinking when it comes to not sharing her own individual experiences with her own sons. So her own sons basically just learned about her past through reading her autobiographies, and it was not typical, and I mean it was the typical thing that occurred, and to not address what happened to the mother or the father for the second generation. Her son Dan even mentions, and I quote, "You have written about it, so now it is time to pass it on to your kids." And end quote. And he says, "It takes it out of the abstract," end quote. And this is met, this is shown in the documentary, and this is met with resistance and silence by Ruth Kluger and a change of topic. And it happens every now and then when the camera gets too close to sort of personal exposure, where she feels that her privacy and her private life is being invaded, she sort of retreats and keeps silence or changes the topic. So after California, in the documentary, she visits Göttingen, where Kluger, as I mentioned, was visiting professor. And then she had this decision to write Weiterleben. She then continues to travel to Israel because she has her book reading on her second memoir, Unterwegs verloren, and then to Bergen-Belsen, and then the last stop is Vienna, where she receives the award. And it's very interesting when it comes to the interaction with her sons, and it's only one son that sort of insisted on going with her to Vienna, because she always denied her sons to even visit Austria with her, and he used sort of to convince her to bring the grandchildren with them. So it was only on his insistence that he said that she would have sort of the obligation to tell her story and to show where the family would originate from. And it was only sort of the grandchildren that made the deal, because she's very sentimental towards them, and she would not have allowed her son just to accompany her. And Ruth Kluger mentions, when it comes to the ambivalent feelings that she has on Vienna, and I quote, "In a way I feel at home here, auf eine Weise vertraut, and I can't deny this feeling. Childhood is more than an episode. It is rooted, it's the root of everything you'll ever be. It keeps on rumbling and never rests here. In Vienna, my childhood talks to me, and it's not all negative, although I was expelled here. The positive, my family and I spent my childhood here. So this divided relationship, as an American tourist who visits Vienna, it is a place I can leave anytime I wish, since I have an American passport. And then, end quote, she sort of continues to follow her own thought, and then she sort of changes the concept of self and how she feels about Vienna. And I quote, "Under any circumstances, and usually, I don't even want to stay there for long. And on the other hand, I do enjoy the fact that I'm not just a tourist. I have friends here. The people accept my language as Austrian, although it sounds old-fashioned," end quote. So she brings together this concept that language and identity are deeply connected, and it might come then as surprising that she herself did never teach or never speak German in her own household, being professor of German studies and German literature. So her sons never learned German, and which also sort of can be understood by how she felt about being expelled and mistreated in Austria, but on the other hand leads to resentments on the son's side. Then in 2008, 100 books were given out and handed out in Vienna in the annual campaign of One City, One Book. And while she was then in Vienna, she was celebrated at the gala at the Wiener Rathaus. And it's very interesting because there she also kind of reflects upon how she feels so very divided on Vienna. And I quote, "I don't like these places." And she refers to the 7th district in the Lindengasse 38, zweiter Stock, so exactly where her family had their apartment, because they're standing in front of the house of this building with her son and with the 2 grandchildren. And she says, "I don't have any good memories. I don't mind them going there, but I have a feeling words will fail me when I go there. Somehow it kills something in me. It kills some of my vitality when I visit the places from the past." And then in front of the house, she sort of retreats, she stays silent and does not speak. So she has the memories she's willing to share with the public in her memoirs, but then in the personal privacy, she finds it very hard to even discuss it with her family members. But she saw it as very important to address what she has lived through because, as she states, "I'm someone people come to listen to me," end quote. So for her son, obviously this experience is also very special, and he also mentions that in this documentary. It is the city she's from and where she would have been living and calling her home if the Holocaust would not have happened. A what if, impossible at this point, which does also match her view on Israel, end quote. So when she visits Israel for the reading of Unterwegs verloren, she also sort of perceives Israel obviously with a much warmer and open feeling, but it's also a place of what if, because she never really emigrated to Israel, so it's only an imaginary space for her, but a safe imaginary space. And she says, "Israel is not my country and never was. That's a different story, a case of what ifs." So throughout the documentary, this inner ambivalent hybrid existence is being exposed to the viewer, and differing from a written memoir on film, you can capture silences that would never be sort of depicted, obviously, in memoirs, or cut out, and parts that you would not be willing to share. But because it's a documentary that she did not sort of sit in front by herself, but that does have a director, there is also episodes and moments that are captured on film that were not being sort of cut out if she was maybe the director herself. So this differs very much from her own autobiography, which was obviously revised way more, but from her own perspective. And when it comes to speaking about this little sentimentality persona that she does not want to reveal to anyone, she also says, "We like to say no point complaining at this late stage, but this saying has two sides. One is cheerful. Let's toast to surviving everything. The other is like an unconscious warning that repressing memories is not the same as forgetting them, and even less overcoming them. Every new loss means another step downhill. On every journey, a bit of yourself disappears. Every loss as walk on is a loss of self, and the next arrival point is like the previous one, in the then and now. There is no new beginning and new installment on a road which is getting even narrower. Has the journey been worthwhile? Well, no point complaining at this point of the game," end quote. So to conclude, it is of no surprise that in both her written autobiographical memoir and then the documentary, she sort of works in high intertextuality and has that knowledge of previous literary concepts of memory, obviously, that one must take into consideration because she is a literary scholar herself, so she knows all the tricks and the game, how it works to sort of write an autobiography. And then still, what is very interesting is that she does cross spaces that are mentioned as metaphorical ones, but also the geographical ones. And particularly in the documentary, The Landscapes of Memory, she repeatedly is willing to share her life situation in which she carries what she calls a Gefühl von zwei unvereinbaren Landschaften, so a feeling of two incompatible landscapes, the one seen from her perspective and the other one from outside, depending on where she is standing and what she is willing to remember. So in the perspective of change of time and of her being a personality that is vibrant and hybrid, it is very interesting to see how she sort of repeatedly recounts her life to give testimony. And for now, I would like to show a very short clip, if we have enough time. Basically the opening, so you can see that she's a very also humorous person, so she has sometimes, especially towards her sons, which can happen in family, let's say dynamics, a very cold attitude, but she's a very humorous person as well and very self-reflective. So let's see. This takes place in Vienna as preparation to the gala that she will hold. There were subtitles. I don't know where they went.
Ein bisschen föhnen.
Ich habe was anderes gesagt.
Auffüllen.
Auffüllen.
Ja, auffüllen.
Ja, ja, ja.
So,
Ja, okay, das ist noch.
Ja.
Ich kann eigentlich nichts anderes als lesen und schreiben. Und das bedeutet, dass ich mich in nichts auskenne außer in Literatur.
Yeah, right now we don't have a parliament in
Mich
Austria.
interessiert und beschäftigt ist nicht zwischen Opfer und Täter, sondern zwischen Opfer sein und frei sein. Verehrte Herren und Damen, wir Überlebende der großen jüdischen Katastrophe des 20. Jahrhunderts, die heutzutage die Shoah oder der Holocaust genannt wird. Wir sind sozusagen ein Auslaufmodell. Nur ganz wenige von uns gibt es noch und diese wenigen, zu denen ich gehöre, waren damals Kinder. Von Kindern möchte ich daher sprechen. Im Mai 1945, also vor 66 Jahren, gleich nach Kriegsende, schickte ich 2 Gedichte, die ich im KZ verfasst hatte und die von der Verfolgung und Vernichtung handelten, an die Hessische Post. Dazu einen Brief, in dem ich stolz verkündete, ich sei zwar erst 13,5 Jahre alt, hätte jedoch schon mehr erlebt als andere mit 50. Die Gedichte hatte ich nicht geschrieben, denn ich hatte kein Schreibmaterial, sondern sie einfach verfasst und im Kopf behalten und manchmal anderen Häftlingen aufgesagt. Und meinte, mit der sprachlichen Kontrolle, die in solchen Kompositionen steckt, beweisen zu können, dass ich kein verschrecktes, bewusstloses Opfer gewesen war, sondern eine, die sich über Wasser halten und aufmerksam beobachten konnte. Also eine, die man ernst nehmen sollte und die in Zukunft mitreden wollte.
When I was a child, my mother told me these stories. I accepted them, I interpreted them in the same way that a child interprets a fairy tale. Not that it wasn't true, but what I thought was, yes, my mother faced the monsters, and she persevered, she survived.
She's an amazing woman, there's no question about it. I mean, I want other people to see it. You have to kind of weave your way through all of the chinks in her armor to get there, but once you get there.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention.